Well, welcome back to the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am your host, Dr. Christopher Holmes, and member of the Black Doctoral Network. Today, I am joined by a phenomenal individual. He goes by the name of Dr. Lonnie Morris. Dr. Morris is a seasoned scholar-practitioner, professor, consultant, and author with more than 20 years of experience in leadership and in service. There's a lot of things that this young man does. He's going to really lay it all out for us today. He has so many gifts and talents in an array of areas. So this is going to be a great conversation. I want to welcome you, Dr. Morris.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. This is going to be an honor. Like I told you before, there are so many things that you do and you do it well. I'm going to try to tailor this conversation so that we can get it all in. If not, there may be a part 2 to this, just letting you know ahead of time.
I'm fine with that.
Awesome. So let's tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about you. Just tell us, where does it all begin for you?
Wow, that's a good place to start. So I would say my career-wise, professionally, I've sort of had two careers so far. I started out in university administration, and which was an incredible passion for me, coming from being a tour guide as a student at Morgan State. So loved getting into the world of admissions, and I was a marketing major. So all the things about promoting an organization to other people and galvanizing their energy and building relationships was just akin to me. And then I moved after a pretty good and fast track career in enrollment. So having been director of admissions at multiple institutions and a VP for enrollment, into being a professor and a consultant. A much easier life. The enrollment world, you keep a target on your back at all times and trying to satisfy presidents and boards to make sure you get the tuition revenue you need, the class profile you want, and the number of people in seats. Professor is a much more relaxed role where I get to help people build their own competencies and create capacity and help them change the places where they work and influence the people that they work with. And so it's been a great transition for me. And it's been a cool career, right? I've seen a lot of things in my time and had a chance to work with some incredible people. And I get a chance to work with extraordinary organizations and bring things to light.
So I know you talked about that you help people in their personal lives create better opportunities and better avenues. So let's dive into this whole realm of leadership, because I know that's a lot of the work that you do. What comes to your mind when you think of the word leadership?
Oh, that's easy. I'd say the biggest thing that I've come to understand, not just as a scholar of leadership, but also a practitioner, is that your behavior is very important because people emulate what they see. And so often leaders don't recognize that even when you are on your worst behavior, the people around you recognize that. And what I find in my work, not just in the research that we do, but also in the writing and consultant and trying to help people be better at work, is that when we see bad things at work, it's because the person who's doing that bad stuff saw somebody else do it previously, right? They watched their boss give bad reviews in performance appraisals. They watched their boss ostracize people at work. And so they adopted that as, well, this is how it must happen. And then they go and carry it on. And we continue to see this just spiral out of control. And it's a downfall of organizations and of great people who have great promise. So when I think of leadership, I think you've got to recognize that everything you do is always being watched, and that you set an example, and that example can be good or it can be bad.
Wow, I love that. And I think sometimes when people think behaviors, they think actually what they physically can see, but the behaviors initiate here. Yeah. And so sometimes what you think is manifested in what you say, and then in turn what you do. So if you've got leaders out there and they've got some bad behaviors, let's just say it, right? They've got some bad behaviors and they're really wanting to turn it around, or maybe let's say their boss wants them to kind of turn that corner. What are some ways we can get leaders to actualize that the behaviors are ineffective, and then some ways to get them to move in a more positive direction?
That's an incredible question. So I think a few things are extremely important. Communication. And we see that in every discipline, how important communication is. But in my work, particularly as a practitioner, I'm often working with people who are experts in their given fields. So engineers, construction, and telecommunications, and healthcare. But a lot of times in those fields, you're trained to be experts in doing this one thing, but you aren't trained on how to communicate better with people. That's not part of the discipline.
Yeah.
You aren't trained on how to lead people, how to manage people. And so communication is so broad in that sometimes it's as simple as telling someone, I don't like what you did, to make somebody aware, right? Or asking someone for feedback on, well, how do you think I handled that situation? And being open to the honest feedback about, well, here's what you did well, but here are the things I want you to work on. And so often when people are behaving badly in organizations, they don't recognize how the people are communicating that they are disliking that to them. Because sometimes it's not as direct as me coming back to you and saying, I don't like what you did.
Right.
But it might turn into somebody who's not speaking up at the meetings anymore because they're tired of you cutting them off. Or they're tired of you trivializing their thoughts, right? So it's recognizing that and being open to hear people share with you about how they want you to be better.
Wow, I heard you say three things that I don't want people to miss, because we have a lot of people that watch this who are even in academia, who are leaders. And so one thing you said, if you're trying to turn the corner to be a more effective leader, number one, you have to be open. You've got to be open. After you become open, you also have to be honest. Honest with yourself and honest with those that you work with and collaborate with. Now, the third one is probably the most difficult one for people to really adopt. And that is be willing to receive feedback. Because would you say, in your expert opinion and in your experiences, that sometimes people perceive feedback to be criticism?
Oh, absolutely. 100% of the time. I've worked with people and trained them on how to give feedback to their superiors. Ask your boss, can we have a moment to talk? And lead with, I want to bring something to your attention. You probably aren't aware of this, and I don't think you meant it, but I want you to know how it impacted me.
Yeah.
So that's a good way of framing it, to say, hey, this is not contentious. Just want to make you aware.
Right.
And the boss is responding with, well, people tell me bad things about you all the time. Right. So immediately a wall goes up because what you feel is attacked rather than a part of a community that's trying to share with you, here's how we can do this together and how we can do it differently. So absolutely. So if you aren't open to it, you get nowhere. If there are people, and I've seen this over time in multiple organizations, multiple people that I've worked with, where the leader, and sometimes it isn't the person who's in charge who is creating this havoc, but this person just thinks everything I do is right. And nothing you can say about me makes sense, right? Because if I believe everything I'm doing is right, then there's no communication that's going to help me at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a fourth thing that is unspoken, and that is you have to learn how to listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you don't learn how to listen, those walls immediately come up.
All right.
So we've got to do a better job of that as leaders. And I think that's something that we all should aspire to be better at, learning how to listen. But communication, I agree with you, is probably one of the most critical things to making a leader effective and making an organization efficient.
Absolutely.
Now, I heard you talk about all the different areas you worked in with all these different types of leaders. Would you say that the skill of leadership is evident, or is it works in any area, any field?
So I would say, one, it's important in every field, right? And I think what's really critical for everyone to understand is that leadership is not about a role. It's not about a position. Leadership from a scholar perspective is about how you engage with people in a space. That could be on a team. That could be in your community group. That can be at your church. For most of us, it's at work. For some of us, when you think about it in terms of our family, right? So how you communicate your needs, how you understand, how you listen to people around you who are involved with you, and how you act on those, and how you reinforce the things that you share as values. That's what leadership is about. It is very much a social construct about how we engage. It doesn't mean that you have to be in charge. You don't have to manage money or manage people to demonstrate excellent leadership. So absolutely, It's important in all fields. It's important in everything we do. And one of the things that is so incredible in the time that I've been in this work is for people who don't even see themselves as leaders, right? Maybe you've been in a mid-level position all your career, and we've got people because they've been in areas with poor leaders and they've been browbeaten so much, they don't want to step into the spotlight. And so they don't even see themselves in that vein. But to help them recognize and to see that it's about the behaviors that you demonstrate and about how you engage with other people, that shifts, right? That's a light that turns on and someone go, oh, I don't have to be the VP to be a leader.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
God, you're tapping on my synapses here. So let me tell you, there's two things I want to bring out of this conversation that you said already. So what I got from that is you don't have to have the title of a leader. Everybody is a leader in some capacity. And I know that to be true because you said in the very beginning, because people are watching your behaviors. Mm-hmm. So even without the title, whatever you do, somebody is watching it, and it in some way may emulate what they see you doing. So in education, I may not be the principal, but I'm a classroom teacher. Mm-hmm. And I've been in a space, let's say 10 years. And that first year teacher's coming in, she's looking for people that she can pick up traits from to make her effective, or at least make the day go better. And I could have some of the worst behaviors in the world, but she sees I have great classroom management. My kids listen to me because of the way I talk to them, but I may talk down to them. But because she's watching me, she may emulate that. So in her mind, I'm her leader.
That's right.
Because of my behaviors. Now, here's another thing that you said. Now, I want you to talk about this because you said we lead in every area of our life. But what happens if you have somebody who would be considered a great leader at work, but an ineffective leader at home?
The interesting thing that you say is what happens, but it always happens. That's the reality. And here's the beauty of leadership, right? Is that you don't have to stand in that all the time. And because it is a social construct, sometimes it's the environment that indicates, right, that impedes how you behave. So when you think about the principles we've been talking about, so being open, communicating, receiving feedback, all those things apply. But sometimes the stimulus, right, around you in different environments prevents you from performing at that. Here's the other thing that's really important. When we think about how leadership is measured, this is the scholarly lens of it, right? When we measure it, we don't measure it and say you are, let's say, an authentic leader or you are not. We measure it on a scale. Yeah. So there are times, depending on the context, when you are more authentic than others. And all that is about the environment. So sometimes maybe it's because there's these other things at home that prevent you from speaking up, that prevent you from standing in this space, that prevent you from being who you are. And we recognize that sometimes with younger professionals who are trying to get out of the shadow of their older siblings or of their parents and their parents' dreams. And so in those spaces, they are a little more docile because they are absorbing more and trying to adhere to the established expectations for them. But when those things are removed and they can flourish in their own right, we see the other things emerge. So most of us are dealing with some type of duality where we're trying to balance, where do I demonstrate that? And the good thing is all of that is part of who you are, right? That's the international rule for intersectionality, right? All of us shows up no matter where we are, just sometimes just a little more in the leadership perspective, sometimes not so much.
All right. So I hope somebody took something from that. I did. I just took something. I just learned something, y'all. So here's what he's saying. Those skills of leadership, they work everywhere, but they all may not be at the same level or same percentage based on the context. If I'm at home and my wife is a little more challenging than the people I work with in my workplace, I may have to increase my listening abilities and my openness and to her feedback, and that may not be the same level at work, but they transfer. They're the same, but different levels depending on the context. So there we go. 4 things, guys: openness, honesty, feedback, being a great listener. They will work anywhere. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dr. Morris. I'm learning today.
Absolutely.
So let's go a little bit further. So, professor, Let's talk about that work. Why do you love it so much?
So this is interesting because I only work with PhD students, right? So I've not done any time in the undergraduate space, maybe earlier part of my career. But most of the work I do now is 100% with PhD students. So executives, professionals, people who are competent in their space and their careers, who've been doing it for years, sometimes for decades, who have a similar background to me, not maybe in my industry, but in performing. And what we know is anybody who wants to tackle the PhD is already an overperformer, right? We're just, hey, we're already extraordinary, already thinking beyond that. And so I get to help those people, and this is good, goes back to your question about this leadership stuff, who are leading in their organization, dominating, changing the workspace, changing the landscape of their industries, who come into a space and then are just learners and absorbing, and the power dynamics shift. And why that's such a special and incredible space for me is because I get to help them match that competence that they have from work with the brilliance that shows up in becoming a scholar-practitioner, right? And opening their eyes to how you can change the world after this, how we can take this academic exercise of writing a dissertation and create a new platform for people to operate in business. And I've had people who come through and make incredible models from their work they then apply to their practice or create instruments, all these types of things. And I've got somebody right now, and even in the final dissertation defense, we said, we know this is a book, right? I hear the book as you speak about it. And that's the type of work that I get to do. And so in a space where you have people who are equally compassionate, equally talented. So one of the things when I was in enrollment, I used to say when we would bring honor students into a space, something's really great about bringing 200 extremely gifted young people into one environment at the same time is that they go from being the best and brightest where they were to being average. And so helping people who are brilliant recognize when they come into a space where they are now average, get back to their brilliance in the new space is incredible. Yeah. That's incredible work.
Let me tell you what I heard you say, because I am a good listener. I try to be. And what I heard you say, and this is what spoke to me, is that you have these powerful people, so to speak, that are entering to your space in academia. And they come in with these titles. And they've been doing this job with this title for years at high levels in terms of performance. And what you share with them goes back to what you said in the beginning. It's not about the title. So what you try to do is diminish the power in the title and increase the power in the talent. Because oftentimes they may be really suppressing what they really could do because they're so humdrum and they're so stuck to who they are, and they've forgotten about what they can really, really do. And I think you pull that out of them, but in a way that's not intimidating. It's not belittling, but what it's saying is you're free in this space to remove the title.
And I appreciate that. And I want to give an example of why this is so important for us to have this conversation about the things you just described for this podcast. I've run into men and women of color who are in a doctoral space, who are incredible in their career, but struggling in the academic space. Not because they can't do it, but because their voice is being crushed. Yeah. The things I want to do here, they're telling me I can't do that. This doesn't fit. And I've listened, and we talk about being a good listener, right? So this ultimate demonstration of great leadership. Listen, and I go, that's incredible. Let's do it. And I can see tears, right? Tears because this is the first time in a space where they are powerless and someone has said, you can. Yeah. I see you. I hear you. I love that. That's why this work is important to me.
Wow. That was powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I can think of so many individuals that would connect with what you just said. With all the power with the title that you have, you feel like you can't. Yeah. And in the space where you have no power, somebody says, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I love that. Now, we also know that you have been involved in some writings, co-editing, some books here. Let's talk about what got you into that space and why that work is important to you.
So I guess, writing has been part of my life forever. So even as a kid in high school, I was a student journalist, carried that on to college, being a student journalist, and ended up running a newspaper at my undergrad school. And so that's been part of me, but also because I started out in marketing. And so a lot of writing and understanding. And then I went into enrollment. And so all the things we have to draft to help, I don't want to say convince, but share the story of our institutions and help people resonate with that to become part of those learning communities. So when I transitioned to being a professor, you know that part of that role is creating new knowledge for people to consume. And what we also understand, particularly from the Black doctor's perspective, is that our voices are so needed, our perspectives are so needed, that we've got to be able to share in that. And then as I talk about, well, I guess this is sort of an extension of what we've discussed in terms of leadership. What I recognize in the spaces where I've operated as a professor is that many of the people who we talk about had these great, powerful positions and who were learning to be an academic. And some of them, like me, didn't go back to do a PhD until 10 years after their undergrad or master's program, or even beyond that. So didn't know how to connect in that space. What does that mean? And so I get a chance. A part of my writing is driven by helping other people get into this, which is why you see me with editing books, because that's a space where I can create spaces for other people to come in and be part of those international writing communities and scholarly communities. And I've probably at this point, I guess I've had maybe 9 or 10 students publish papers with me and present at international conferences on the work that they're doing and the work that we're doing together. So that's really, really important. Yeah. But I think the other thing is that becomes the work that other people consume and get to document on their journey. I'll give you an example. There's a young lady who came into a course that I was teaching at the PhD level, and I think I was probably her second instructor. And it was a class on global leadership. Her and someone else in that class did a pretty excellent assignment that I was already working on a writing project. We took the bones of what they have put together for this project in the class and merged it with something I was already writing on and got a paper published in a book. Right. So then here they are, second term PhD students with a paper published in a book. We took that same thing and then did a proposal to do a panel at an international leadership conference in Belgium. So we went to Belgium and had them on a panel talking about the work they did. Then we took that same document that became a framework, and she used the framework in the paper she published as a second term PhD student as the conceptual framework for her dissertation. So now in her dissertation, she was citing herself from term 2 in the program and then added to that, right? So coming full circle, we get to take these small seeds that we plant early on, which is back to this writing, right? Which is why that is so important, of helping them follow the thread all the way through. And it was something very critical to the type of work she does in her profession. So I see it all as very much connected and part of the journey, and important, not just for facilitating and shepherding other people in the path, but also for creating spaces for others to say, that's somebody I need to make sure to integrate into this work.
Yeah. See, and I love what you do because you call yourself a scholar-practitioner. And I love that word play or that word combination, because the people that you instruct, they are potentially going back to work and creating better work environments as a leader. They could potentially also go into the field of academics and, be at higher ed. But at the end of the day, you have the experience of leadership in the field. So when you share that knowledge, share those experiences, it makes the work more relevant and real, and it brings in that value added measure, right? Do you feel like you could be doing the work of helping leaders without the doctorate?
So that's 2-part. One, absolutely, right? Because it's been part of me from the very beginning. Even when I was an enrollment guy, when I would have younger professionals reach out to me about my career and ask questions about being a director and moving forward, and I would say, let me be very clear. I am a good enrollment manager. I am an excellent manager of people, right? So I tapped into that very early as an undergrad in an org behavior course. Like, these are the things that speak to me. So I went into a master's program to learn org development. So I've always been very, very keen on how people engage in spaces, how people lead, and how we move people through building collaborations and communication and openness, right? So that's been very important. So absolutely, I could still do that work. And I was doing that work even at that time. The doctorate adds a different feather in the cap, right? So Mr. Lonnie Morris is incredible and still makes a statement and is still competent. Dr. Lonnie Morris, with 2 awards for research in the space, with 2 awards for innovation and instructing in the space, with 10 publications around leadership in the space. Those things create, wait, who was that? Mm-hmm. So it gives me the opportunity when I don't feel like being bothered, I can step away.
Yeah.
Or when I want to make sure that you're hearing the point that I'm making in the room, they go, wait a minute, Dr. Morris is talking. Right, so that's very important. And one of my mentors told me a long time ago, because it took me a while, even though I was in the higher ed space, to go back and do the PhD. One of my mentors said, it's almost like being in a football game without a helmet. It's like, bro, you need the proper equipment.
Yeah. I love that. It's something about it's not about seeking authority with the doctorate. It gains the attention of people because people perceive you to be the expert. Now it's up to you to prove them right, of course, but with all the backing and the awards and the recognition that you have, could you have done all of that without the doctorate? Likely not.
Yeah. Likely not.
Let's go a little bit deeper. And I want to talk a little bit more about who is Lonnie Morris. If you had one wish, what would that wish be?
That's an interesting question. So I've thought about this often, and I think the wish has changed for me over time. The wish right now would be that we instill the principles of leadership, the things that we've talked about, the 5 things we identify right now, in young people much earlier.
Yeah.
And that we identify it as such, that we speak to it as such, so we help them articulate it, right? And you mentioned this earlier, and I've dealt with this in working with people in professional space, academic space. How you speak about something is how you act towards it.
Yeah.
So if you recognize that this thing of listening, openness, receiving feedback, critical feedback, and that we put that, because remember, children are very open. They absorb everything.
Yes.
Right? They absorb it. And they only start questioning things when we make it weird. Right? Yes. Adults make things weird.
Yeah.
Children are open to anything. Oh, hey, let's go. That's what happens. They just go with it.
Mm-hmm.
We put these restrictions on how they think, how they perceive. And so I wish that we could remove those things. And here's why that's really important. Because we're seeing that in what's happening across the generations in the workplace right now, as we look at the comparative of Gen Z, Gen X, how people are integrating into the spaces, how some of it's working out, some of it not so much. But if we have a collective narrative about that experience and these skills that we're talking about, these competencies, these soft skills that organizations are talking about, and we start that early, we change what the long-term narrative looks like. We change the story. Yeah. We impact the experiences of people across the board. So the people that you've encountered in your organization who are the not so good managers, who are following behavior that they're emulating behavior that they saw that wasn't so good, that they then hated, that's not the model they have to look for anymore.
Yeah.
They already instilled it as something foundational for people at a younger age.
Whew. Totally agree. So let's say there's somebody's watching you, somebody's listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, and they're saying, I'm becoming more intrigued about this work of leadership, of supporting organizations to be more effective, creating better structures for better work environments. What advice would you give somebody who is wanting to enter into this space that you're currently in?
That's a very, very good question. So like everything, you've got to educate yourself, right? And so that in these days and times, that does not necessarily mean formal education.
Right.
For us with doctorate degrees, we agree in that and we subscribe to that, but that's not the only option right now. So just like with anything else, if you want to engage in that and you want to perform in that, you've got to study that. Right. So not only am I a scholar practitioner, but I'm a student of leadership. And I've been reading and studying and watching and documenting those things happening all the time. So one of these things about documenting, one of the projects we've been working on with the book too, is the book that we just had come out last year, When Leadership Fails, documenting these experiences people are having in organizations with bad bosses. Got a special journal issue coming out for a journal next year. The same thing, documenting people's experiences with bad bosses, but teasing out the lessons for organizations, the lessons for individuals, the lessons for groups in that, right? So helping to change the narrative about it. So I give you that example of saying I've been a student of this for a long time. Even when I was an undergraduate student, when I was a master's student, when I was in the admissions role, when I was in the enrollment role, I was always watching these leadership issues, looking at how people respond to different things in the environment, looking at how people engaged, looking at how people ran meetings, looking at how they gave out resources, how they reinforced the messages, all those things. So if that is your passion or even your interest, you got to become a student of that. Just like an athlete would, right? An athlete will practice that skill every day until it's time to perform. So that way, when it's time to perform, you are ready. The next thing is, remember that that you can master something and you can give incredible insight to others in any space in which you currently exist. You don't have to be a part of a consulting firm. You don't have to have a book. You don't have to have peer-reviewed journal articles, right? You don't have to be a partner at any of these spaces. You can, based on what you know, based on the excellence that you've portrayed, based on the competence that you develop by studying this craft every day, you can go out and change the people around you, change the organization you're in, change the spaces that you engage in without a whole bunch of external support. It's in you.
Yeah. I love that. It's in you. And it just hearing you talk makes me think of another BDN member, Dr. Wendy Edmonds, and she speaks and writes of what she calls toxic followership, which is a phenomenal idea. When she brought it to me, I had never heard of it, but sometimes it takes toxic leaders. They only are successful or only exist if you have toxic followers. And those toxic followers develop the same mindsets and behaviors of that leaders, and they begin to replicate it when they become leaders. And so hearing what you are saying, be a researcher, be a student of leadership. And you don't have to be in great spaces and have all this other stuff to do it. It's in you. You can if you choose to, but you don't have to be. But if not, if you don't get under the right information, get the research right, get the tutelage right, you could become a toxic follower. And
interesting that you mentioned Dr. Wendy Edmonds, because she is an incredible scholar and friend and colleague and partner. We worked on multiple projects together. I love her work, and the work that she's done around toxic followership is incredible. And so that's an important thing, right? Because the toxicity is what we're all working against.
Yeah.
So if you follow that model that she laid out for you, and you follow those ideas of people emulate the behaviors that you demonstrate, and then you apply this positive energy that we're talking about, right? This hope for a better future, this instilling this in young people so that they move throughout life as this is part of their understanding and backbone. Do we get something really good out of that, right? Taking people who are in positions of power, and when they feel powerless, re-engaging them with that power in the new space. That's how you create incredible followers, right? You create incredible leaders throughout the community.
Yeah.
That's how we change.
Oh, so you said community, so you trigger something else, because now what I hear is that leaders disrupt toxicity. Or they disrupt negativity. Oh my God, y'all listen, and shout out to Wendy Edmonds. Shout out to We name dropped on you, Dr. Evans.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. What has been your biggest challenge? And what did you learn from it?
That's a really good one. I think earlier in my career, it was youth. So I had a really fast track career, and I share this all the time, particularly under this idea of challenge. And I share it with people I get to work with in the consulting space and the academic space. So I became a director of admissions. I was probably 26, and I was a VP at 29.
Wow.
So I was moving, shooting right through. And while I was competent and talented, age was always an issue. And so I would tell you that the challenge it wasn't problematic per se, but I'd be in a space as a director of admissions. You know, a director of admissions on any campus has some type of political power and some social power. You're managing lots of things. You're in charge of a lot of things that the president's looking for, the board is looking for. And I love it because I know it wasn't intentional at times, but there would be the wonderful Black mothers and Black sisters on my campus who would see me as their son, see me as their nephew, see me as their grandson. And that was important in tapping into who I'm as a person. But it also created a barrier for me to do work at times, because when you talk about disrupting, right? So when you're a disruptor and you're young, what they see as a child. Yeah. Yeah. You might be the director, but you remind me of my son. I'm not your son, man. Yeah. I'm not your son. So that was part of the issue. So that was it. So it was, and I think because I also had a youthful appearance, I don't know, I might still have that at times, right? So having a youthful appearance and youth creates a challenge in a space that is traditional and trying to hold on to how it's operated for a long time. Yeah. So I was seen as a disruptor who was young and maybe competent, but didn't always know what he was talking about. That created some ceilings for me at times. Yeah. Later in my career, what became a challenge was voice. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So I have never been one to hold my tongue. Absolutely not. But also, I believe in transparency around that. And I think at times there's some political structure to that. And I started in my older age, and with the credentials and the experience that I bring, and you start getting awards and being appreciated for the work that you do and how you engage with people and people that come into your space, started not caring as much for the political structures. Not that I was dismissive of those, but also very intentional about trying to dismantle those structures that kept other people from having power, from making progress, and from feeling empowered. And when you speak against that, sometimes it creates challenges for you in organizations. Yeah. Not necessarily in professional space in the entire landscape, but you who might have been lauded as this comfortable person that we love working with. And Lonnie is always great to be around, and he's charismatic and he makes us laugh. But wait, he just called me out. We can still be friends. Yeah. But I can tell you about yourself. Yeah. Right. We are still great colleagues. And I don't think anything is wrong with you. And I am not indicting you, but I am identifying where you are wrong and holding you accountable. Yeah. So my competence as a scholar, my competence as a practitioner in the space of leadership in organizations and helping people do better in those began to infuse with how I show up in the comfortable spaces to make people uncomfortable. And when you begin to make people uncomfortable, it creates issues. Yeah. In the Southern church world, we call that stepping on toes. Absolutely, it is.
And I love it. I love stepping on a good toe every now and then.
Absolutely, it is.
Tell me this. What would you say has been your biggest accomplishment today?
That's a great question. And so interestingly enough, it has nothing to do with any award that I've won, any book that I've written. It really comes from people who are on the same level as me, who are colleagues, who've been collegial, who see me. I'll give you 3 quick examples that demonstrate this. When I was leaving my first role as a director of admissions to go be a vice president, there was a young man. We were both in our early mid to late 20s working on a campus, and we worked in different divisions. We had different supervisors, but we collaborated often. And when I announced that I was leaving to go leave that institution to go to a new institution across the country, he reached out to me. He said, "What am I going to do without you being here?" Right? It was someone who was a great friend, a great colleague, a great collaborator, who called me to say, "I want to make sure that you understand how your presence and your voice has impacted me in this space, and that will be missed."
Yeah.
When I was leaving in another organization, I had a supervisor in my performance evaluation once tell me, now there were some bad things in this in this exchange, but the thing that was important that continues to resonate with me that I didn't quite understand at that moment, but I do now. And she said to me, "You are like an eagle in a chicken coop." I'm like, "What does that mean?" At the time, I wasn't mature enough to take it all in. Over the years, I recognized part of what she was saying to me is that everybody here is a bird, right? We are all part of this same genealogy. But how you think, how you operate, you are a predator. Everybody else here is not a predator.
Yeah.
Right. Your wingspan is beyond ours. And so the things that you bring to this organization, the things that you bring to our collaborations, the thing that you bring to this work is different and as on a different scope of some of the things we're doing here. So I want you to recognize that and continue to move with that. And I would say, and then even more recently, I laugh because we talked earlier about how you might not recognize people are communicating some of your toxicity to you, so they might stop communicating sometimes in open sessions. And I did not realize that I was doing that in a certain space, I had stopped contributing. I didn't realize it until after some meeting, another colleague said, "Hey, I want to talk to you really quickly," and said, "What's going on? Because in the last few sessions, you haven't said much." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "No." And what he said to me is, this is what helps me to tie these things together, right? He said, it is painfully obvious that you are not contributing. Painfully. Right? So this is someone who was a friend and a colleague and a professional colleague said, "Your voice is missing."
Wow.
Those have been the greatest moments of my career, because it says that outside of how the organization thinks about you, outside of how much you make, outside of what position you hold, outside of what title you have, outside of what you publish, outside of what awards you've won, that the people who stand by you and work with you regularly recognize the significance of your contributions.
Yeah.
Those are the things that have made this all worth it for me.
Wow. We need to hear from you, brother. They need to hear from you, and we need to hear from you. And that is why you are sitting right here on this interview, because you have so much to share. And I wanted to make sure that we had given you the proper opportunity to share just a little bit, guys. This is just a little bit. There's a whole lot more, but just a little bit of the mind of Dr. Lonnie Morris. Dr. Morris also shared with us a little bit about your affiliation with the Black Doctoral Network. How has it been? What are you looking to get out of this relationship?
So this is a great question, because I got 2 things that really been great in terms of my time with the Black Doctoral Network. So first, I have met some of the most incredible people from all walks of life and from all professions. And some of them have become incredible friends, and we talk regularly, and it led to incredible collaborations and doing corporate projects and doing academic projects and doing research projects. So the space has allowed me to navigate differently in 2 industries. So I love BDN for that. Second is it challenged me. When you get to a point, a level of success, and I laugh because sometimes things start to become, as soon as you get the Midas touch, right? Anything you do turns to gold. You can write a proposal, get the grant, write a proposal, get into the conference. But I'll tell you, Black Doctoral Network rejected my conference proposals for years, every year. Nope, came to, man, what is going on? And just kept something. And I'm thinking, because everything else is going on full throttle, but BDM said, nope, that doesn't go here. So what it made me do was rethink and reevaluate what's the message I need to articulate about the work that I do. What are the needs of the audience, and how do I share that? How do I identify with their needs with the value proposition of my work? And so it wasn't until after, I think I've been affiliated for probably 7 or 8 years now. So it wasn't until 2021 that I got a paper accepted, proposal accepted to present there. But it was meaningful because it forced me to reevaluate and rethink how I communicate this work to this audience. And so I thank the community and the evaluators of proposals for that, because it was the only place, and I'm not saying it was the only place that was telling me no. So it humbled me and made me better.
There we go. BDN, making academics listen. Taking that feedback. Dr. Morris, I want to thank you so much for joining me today for the Black Doctor Talk podcast. It has truly been a pleasure. We had a little bit of conversation before we started this interview. So let me say, one, I appreciate you for the position that you sit in professionally, but I also appreciate you for the position that you currently sit in physically. Thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for your heart. Would you please share with our viewers and our listeners a little bit about where they can go to find out more about the work that you do? Sure.
So you can find me on Instagram, right? So Lonnie Morris Jr., like what space? So many spaces. Lonnie Morris Jr., that's fine. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Right now, there's an issue, so I'm waiting for them to reactivate my account on LinkedIn. But same thing, my name, Lonnie Morris Jr. With, you mentioned Dr. Wendy Edmonds, we actually co-host a podcast on Living Corporate. Our podcast is called The Access Point, so you can find us there. And I am currently a professor at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. So all of my academic work is there. Awesome. Well, guys, please go out, check out and follow Dr. Morris on all of his social medias. And while you're doing that, stop by and follow and check out the Black Doctoral Network as well. We would love to connect with you on our social media channels. Thank you for joining us today for the Black Doctor Talk podcast. It, again, has been one for the books with Dr. Lonnie Morris. We hope you will join us next time. But for now, be safe, be blessed. See you again. Bye-bye.